The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, has told a very relieved Labor Party room in Canberra today that there will be a serious review of the party's election performance and its future direction. Liberal MPs also met for the first time since the election, although not in the circumstances they had dared to hope for, to welcome newly elected MPs and to re-endorse the leadership team. Julia Gillard continues to work on her new ministry to be sworn in early next week, while Tony Abbott is only planning minimal changes to his front bench, which will now include former leader Malcolm Turnbull. Political editor Heather Hewitt reports.
Liberal and Labor MPs gathered for their first meetings since the election. Both sides hailed their leaders as heroes. In the caucus room, Julia Gillard was applauded for pulling off the big prize and keeping Labor in government. Never mind that it wasn't quite the government they'd expected. Tony Abbott was applauded by his colleagues for almost pulling off the big prize and doing way better than any of them would have predicted the last time they'd all met.
Team, there are a lot more of you now than there were just a few weeks ago.
There were new members to welcome aboard, and one in particular Tony Abbott was very happy about.
You know, perhaps the deepest heartbreak of the 2007 election was losing the seat of Bennelong. Well, that wrong has been righted. Would you please welcome the Honorary Senator?
Then there was the youngest addition to Liberal ranks from Queensland.
The member for Longman Whiteroy.
Who was taking it all in and putting his ambitions on hold for now.
Peter Costello said on election night you'd be leader by 2035.
Yes, I didn't challenge today.
The Liberal leadership team was re-endorsed, including the Deputy, Julie Bishop, despite last-minute discussions yesterday about whether Andrew Robb might challenge her. This morning, the possibility was being summed up this way.
Probably a bit of a brain snap.
A bit of a brain snap from Andrew Robb.
Well, it's Julie Bishop's been a fantastic deputy and run a great campaign and the great state of Western Australia.
The only brain snaps I see are in the new traffic light coalition.
How long do you think before that traffic light coalition starts to crumble?
Well, I think day one it started.
This is a government which is already looking very frayed around the edges.
As Tony Abbott today sought to rally his troops to come out fighting as an effective opposition in dealing with the new minority government, Greens leader Bob Brown reiterated that he'd be happy to deal with Tony Abbott on some issues.
The big thing here is that we have a good basis for working with Prime Minister Gillard and her government, and will do so. It's very exciting, and I'm open to discussing with Tony Abbott how to have him brought aboard as a constructive opposition to make this parliament work in the interests of all Australians. There's more to opposition than simply calling illegitimate the people who've won office in the wake of an election. There's much more to opposition than doing that.
Not exactly what Julia Gillard would have had in mind when she signed on with the Greens last week, but then she is operating in strange new circumstances. Today she urged her caucus colleagues to look to the future and not dwell on the past. But the Prime Minister said she acknowledged the clear message from the election campaign was that Labor needed to renew its sense of purpose, and teamwork was vital. She wanted to be more inclusive and for caucus members to feel they could raise issues openly. In other words, she'd operate differently to her predecessor. As for Kevin Rudd, he sat quietly at the back of the room, while one member queried the timing of his ousting.
The party should have faced up to the problem a lot earlier. That's my summary of what that contribution was, that it should not have been allowed to get to the crisis point it did. There should have been action by the party earlier in dealing with the issue.
And do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not going to sort of try and verbal what was said in the caucus, but I think it would be very silly if we thought that they weren't traumatic events and that people weren't affected a number of ways by them. They were, and I think the Australian electorate were as well.
The electorate will soon find out what the new parliament is going to look like and how MPs behave under the new rules demanded by the independents. Julia Gillard announced today the parliament would sit in 2 weeks' time, and here's the government's rationale.
I think it is important that the parliament goes back. Because if you look at the rantings of the opposition, who talk about the fragility of the circumstances, I think it's very important that we demonstrate that not only have we formed a government, but that we are implementing the new paradigm.
There's one new member planning to sit on the crossbenches when Parliament resumes, who shouldn't expect the good wishes of maverick Liberal Wilson Tuckey, who today officially declared his defeat by West Australian national Tony Crook.
I await for his vision of his maiden speech, when I think he believes the entire Parliament will turn up to listen to him, when he'll be lucky to have others there than his relatives.
Nothing like a gracious loser. As Julia Gillard now gets on with the job of forming her new ministry, Tony Abbott will wait to see her line up early next week before announcing minimal changes to his own frontbench. Malcolm Turnbull returns to the Shadow Ministry and Joe Hockey looks set to stay in the position of Shadow Treasurer, despite speculation that Malcolm Turnbull and Andrew Robb are both after his job.
I welcome ambition. I think everyone in politics has a level of ambition. So be it.
Will Malcolm Turnbull have your job?
Well, I think everyone's got to focus on their own job, and I'm focusing on my job.
What he's not focusing on is one of the independents' greatest suspicions when they were negotiating with Tony Abbott and his team over who should lead a minority government, and that is that the coalition might be keen to force Australia back to the polls.
I think there'll be an early election. Will this government go through?
Oh, look, we've only just got over the last election. Please don't start speculating on doing election.
Do you think it'll happen though in the next?
I hope not. I hope not. One's enough.
On that point, he speaks for many of us.
Political editor Heather Ewart.